My family recently went on a short vacation with a few other families that we are close to, which meant that we all went to mass together at a parish that was unfamiliar to us. And as unfamiliar as that parish was to us, I kind of got the impression that we were an unfamiliar sight to them. Because my family and the families that we were with, we tend to observe, let's say, a more traditional standard of modesty in dress. And this includes veils and head coverings for the girls. And it's unfortunate that I have to point this out, but I feel I do. That practice was one that they adopted on their own rather than one that I imposed. In fact, my wife and daughters are far more rigorous and vigilant about such things than I would ever expect them to be. Anyway, shortly after we entered into our pew, I overheard a pair of older ladies sitting right behind us remarking about the head coverings, which was apparently a novel and conspicuous enough sight they felt the need to discuss it. And I heard one of them say she remembered wearing them as a child, but was glad when they didn't have to anymore. The other remarked in a kind of a knowing way, Vatican II, to which the other agreed, yes, Vatican II changed all of that. And I have to confess, I was so tempted to turn around and ask them in which document of Vatican II did they say that head coverings were actually no longer appropriate. But then I remembered, of course, that getting into historical debates with little old ladies wasn't the reason that I was at Mass, and then I thought better of it. But the truth I have to admit, and maybe some more traditionally minded people will be surprised to hear, is that this discipline did change. A document published by the CDF under Pope St. Paul VI called Inter Insignores said that the obligation to wear a veil no longer had normative value, and it eventually just disappeared as an obligation when the revised Code of Canon Law came out in 1983, which had removed it. And with that slight adjustment, we went from virtually all women wearing head coverings at Mass to short shorts and tank tops being a normal sight today. In fact, modesty in dress, either for men or women, is so foreign to contemporary life in countries like Canada, where I live, or the US, that any suggestion that we might benefit from kind of a rediscovery of those practices, and I'm speaking from experience here, is often met with astonishment and indignation. That's because we now live in an age in which concern for modesty and dress is so foreign that our immediate reaction is to treat it as morally wrong or like a grave infringement upon our freedoms. In other words, we live in an age of extreme immodesty. When a society adopts any kind of extreme position as normative, I would argue that a hyperbolic contradiction is the best antidote. In the same way, we live in a time in which extreme androgyny is running just mad through our media and our institutions to the point where an almost hyperbolic reclamation of masculinity and femininity seems to be a good way to push back against that insanity. If we lived in an age in which decadence, gluttony, and greed were pervasive, which let's admit they kind of are today, then a hyperbolic asceticism might be a good antidote, as it was for St. Francis when he embraced poverty as a means of rebuking the life that he was so tempted to live by his surroundings. And Jesus used hyperbole in this way in his teachings as well. In Matthew 23, Jesus says that we should avoid calling someone rabbi or father or master, because the people in his day, they were so obsessed with the honor that came from titles, places of prestige, investments, and signs of nobility, that he utterly denounces honorific titles altogether, just to try to drive that point home. Obviously, he's not saying that titles are wrong in and of themselves, but that self-exaltation is wrong and hypocritical in the case of the Pharisees, and something to be avoided. I'd argue that this kind of hyperbole is exactly what our culture needs today. We need Catholics to be a sign of contradiction in the world, which was a phrase that St. John Paul II liked to use. If we want to draw our culture away from the decadence, the licentiousness, and the immodest extremes it now embraces. If a particular vice is pervasive because of our indifference towards it, sometimes a conspicuous portrayal of the opposite virtue is exactly what we need to stir us out of that indifference. We need to show people another way by making a scene out of our countercultural way of life. Pope Benedict XVI believed that in this post-Christian age we're living in now, trying to reclaim Christianity's dominance and influential hold over society, he thought that was a futile way forward. Instead, what we need today is to be what he called a creative minority that influences the broader culture with its bold refusal to do as everyone else does. So if the world today embraces gluttony and sloth, Catholics need to be extreme in their self-control and diligence. If the world embraces cowardice to the extreme, Catholics need to be hyperbolic in our fortitude. If the world practices extreme forms of immodesty, then Catholics need to joyfully practice extreme forms of modesty, and the best place to start doing so is at Mass. If we can't practice it when nothing could be more appropriate, then we can't really be counted on to be a source of renewal for the broader culture. Sure, maybe head covering, suits and ties, and long skirts aren't a requirement in church law, but we should do it anyways because it's such a bold affirmation of the virtues that have been utterly lost or forgotten, not only in the world today, but also within the sanctuary of the church's liturgy. And I would argue that it's a daring thing to do. It's a brave thing to do. I go to the Latin Mass with my family where, for the most part, people take the obligation to wear their Sunday best pretty seriously. And there's a park across the street from where we go to Mass, and we all tend to congregate there in community after. And when people are just passing by with their dogs or whatever, the look on their faces is, for at least for me, pretty fun to watch. Because we stand out as a crowd. We look like some kind of historical reenactment taking place in the park. Like we all just stepped out of a time machine from the early 1900s, and people don't know what to make of us. But the looks they give suggest, I would say, curiosity more than indignation. If I had to guess why, I'd think it might have something to do with the fact that we're a rich community of people all enjoying one another's company, which is a rare thing in today's world, which is more often best characterized by loneliness, unfortunately. So here we are taking for granted this very full community life that we enjoy while looking like we're about to step foot on the Titanic. And you can tell it's a curiosity for the people staring at us. They see something foreign to their sensibilities, but also probably attractive and almost enviable for the mere fact that we don't suffer the loneliness that is so common today. And if it isn't apparent, our common cultural sensibilities has everything to do with that lack of loneliness. Now, I know that whenever I address the topic of dressing your best for Mass, someone will say something like this. They'll say, Jesus wouldn't turn away the homeless man in torn jeans or the prostitute in a short skirt and a tube top, so stop insisting that people dress a certain way for Mass, which I find to be a frustrating reply because it's so obvious that it hardly needs to be said. Obviously, Jesus accepts people on the margins as they are with exceptional mercy, but the fact it's exceptional means it isn't normative. When something is a norm or a rule, the fact of it being the rule is also what provides for exceptions as exceptions, in this case, mercy. If you abolish the norms that stand in contrast to what is normal in the case of poverty or the desperation of prostitution, then you also abolish the occasion to show mercy to people in such circumstances, precisely because they are in the exception and in need of mercy. To point out that Jesus would accept someone as they are is to highlight how exceptional his mercy is. But if we abolish the norms that distinguish those exceptions, then there would be nothing special about his mercy. In fact, it wouldn't even be mercy anymore. It's also true to more plainly say that Jesus doesn't turn away sinners, but that doesn't mean that their sinfulness should be accepted as normative and not in need of some sort of correction. He welcomes them so that he can be a physician to their spiritual illness so that the illness might be cured. When the prostitute or the tax collector approaches him in the Gospels, he doesn't affirm them in their state of life. He accepts them as they are out of mercy because they are the exception again. And then after they repent, he tells them to go and live a redeemed life. If we come to Mass or if we come to him in worship and because of weakness or poverty, we aren't able to present ourselves in a fitting way in our dress and our decorum, he will overlook our weakness out of mercy. But once he has strengthened us and removed those weaknesses, were our lack of decorum to persist, it couldn't be said that it's out of weakness. Rather, it would be out of indifference and disrespect. Just because something is excusable for the impoverished doesn't mean that those who have means are equally excused for the same reasons. When someone lacks a certain strength, mercy is available. But if someone possesses that strength but refuses to exercise it, they aren't entitled to the same allowances. In fact, Jesus turns the script on those who would say otherwise. He says, to those who are given much, much will be expected of them. You probably won't find much sympathy if you say to him, I was only doing it because you gave allowances for that poor person over there, to which I'm sure he would reply, but you aren't poor. So why should such allowances be given to you? You don't have the same excuses. If I or someone else criticizes general habits of bringing a casual attitude to our conduct at Mass, it isn't because we want to denounce those who are suffering from poverty. We're talking about those for whom that's not an excuse. Of course, allowances are made for poverty or desperation or even ignorance as exceptions to the rules, but just because there are exceptions to the rules doesn't mean we should abolish the rules. It's the rules that make the exceptions possible, and in this case, that means the blessed occasions of exercising Christian charity. Can I ask you to stick around for one extra minute? Because if you enjoyed that, well, first of all, thanks for watching. But now I could really benefit from your help, which you can do in a couple of ways. You can check out my sponsor, Real Estate for Life, who is a network of pro-family real estate agents that can connect you with one in your area. So if you're looking to buy a home, check them out at realestateforlife.org. And if you can help out directly financially, I tend to trust that most of my regular viewers can afford to drop a $5 tip in my jar once a year, and if they did, I wouldn't have to worry about the financial viability of this effort. So if you do want to support, you can go to brianholdsworth.ca/support, or join me in my locals community to get exclusive content and chances to interact with me and members of the like-minded community at brianholdsworth.locals.com.